Edition of School Board U. We are happy to have with us some guests from different districts around the state. Before we get started, I'll introduce myself. I, of course, am Susan Holson, the Director of Education Services at VSBA, and Carrie Lamb is also on the line.
Hi, how's everyone today?
Carrie is the magic behind the scenes, so if you're having any kind of technical issues, please call her at, actually the numbers I've got listed here are the office numbers, and those are not going to work.
I'll give you my number is 802-477-3601.
477-3601 if you have any technical difficulties. We're also joined today by an illustrious group of Vermont education leaders from Rutland Northeast Supervisory Union. We have Lori Bertrand, who is both the chair of the Otter Valley Unified Union School District and of the Rutland Northeast Supervisory Union, joined by Jeannie Collins, the superintendent there. From Mill River Unified Union School District, we have Tammy Heffernan, the chair, and Dave Younts, the superintendent. And from Montpelier Roxbury School District, the board chair, Jim Murphy, and Libby Bonesteel, the superintendent. We're going to hear from each district group and have time to take your questions as we go along. Let's turn it over to our panelists. We'll start with the group from Rutland Northeast Supervisory Union. And we're going to try some technology magic here and see if they'll pop on your screens when they share up their webcams. There's Jean Collins. And Lori Bertrand does not have a webcam, so she'll be joining us by audio. So I'm not sure which one of you is planning to start this discussion, but really what we're looking to you to find out is how have you been managing during this state of emergency? What role has the board been playing? And what are you learning as you go along? Things that you'd like to be able to share, or maybe you have questions for others.
So, Jean, I'll start if you're okay with that. I think the board role so far has, for us in our district, is really to just support Jean. You know, at this point, we entered the operations phase of this COVID situation, and she's our go-to person as the superintendent. She needed to figure out what needed to happen to make everything go smoothly or as smoothly as possible. And so I let her do what she needed to do. She communicated with me whenever she needed something from us, and I tried to keep our board calm. And I just tried to be the calm in the storm as far as like if there were issues that came up from our board members, I tried to be the go-between so that Jean didn't have 17 people rushing questions at her. As we move forward, again, I think our role is just to support Jean. If she needs something, we're there. But really, this is her purview.
Thanks, Lori. I'll tag on to that. And I just want to note that Lori chooses not to be on camera with me, but we'll just move on from that. No, the board has been fabulous. And the day that the governor closed the schools, that was a Sunday, and I had an emergency meeting of the administrative council and immediately called Lori and Debbie Singizer, my other board chair at Barstow, to fill them both in as to what was happening. What I really needed from the board at that time was for them to understand that there was a plan, what the plan was, and let us do the plan. And what the way that played out was beautiful. Lori, Debbie, and Brenda Hummel, who was the incoming chair of Barstow, all three of them were very supportive on Sunday night. I tried to keep them and the rest of the board updated as we move forward with the plans, and then use the board meetings to share and answer questions from the board as well as share with the community as the board meetings are public. Lori and Debbie and Brenda all did a great job, I thought, of allowing me to do the job that they hired me to do, of running interference and maybe funneling questions from board members through them to me, so I don't have 17 different people asking me questions. And that was just perfect support. That was exactly what we needed to get things off the ground. One of the things that, plans change, and on Sunday the 15th, we were going to be closing as of Wednesday, March 18th. On the 16th, that changed, and we were closing the next day. And communicating with the chairs and communicating with the board was helpful not to have that questioned, and to have the support of making the decisions that I needed to make quickly.
Has the board played any kind of a role in the transition to distance learning?
Our role really has been to just disseminate information as best we can. Jean's been doing a phenomenal job, and her team, of getting information out as to what distance learning looks like in our district. And I think what our role is to keep everybody calm, let them know that yes, we hear them, we know that there's challenges and that we're working on them. And but at this point, that all that operation stuff is really Jean's purview, since we are policy governance, and we are there to make sure that the financial risks are overseen, and that she's being accountable for her job, which she's doing a phenomenal job. We are so glad she picked us to be our superintendent, and she's just done a phenomenal job.
Thank you, Lori. It's true, the continuity of learning plan really is an operational plan, working with the Agency of Education, working with the curriculum director and the principals. That was something that I needed to put into place for the SU and keep the board informed. The board's role, of course, we're a policy governance board, and quite a while ago they set a number of policies, an ends policy, so we knew what we were shooting for student achievement, and different policies around making sure that I am keeping the district financially solvent and treating staff and parents well, et cetera. So the board's role was more my reporting to them how I'm doing within those policies, but the writing of the continuity of learning plan was at the administrative level.
Excellent.
I have 2 questions, Susan. Would you like them now?
Sure.
Okay. First one is anyone providing trauma training across the boards to address problems students may be having at home, as well as to prepare for the next school year?
Jean, do you want to answer that?
Yeah. So we have done quite a bit of trauma training, and we're doing a lot of discussion within the district about the stress that this distance learning is causing for families as well as causing for staff.
And parents.
And yeah, families and parents. But we aren't doing trauma training specific to the reopening of school yet. We are shifting our thoughts towards the reopening of school, and we are very aware that this is a traumatic situation for many, and the change of leaving school and the change of returning to school both have to be addressed. So we are very aware. Our guidance counselors, we have a social emotional learning coach, our clinical social workers and mental health providers are all in contact with families, particularly the families with whom we have greater concerns on a regular basis, to provide those supports now, and that will continue as we reopen schools.
Okay, and the second question is, what sort of system did you use to funnel questions from board members to administration? How frequently were members updated by the administration?
Lori, you want that one?
Sure. So I communicated with board members that if they had any questions for Jean, to direct them to me, just so that she wasn't being bombarded, which our board members were great about doing. And I was able to answer some of those questions just because I was in constant communication with Jean anyway. And then as far as how often we heard from Jean quite a bit. She was great about sending out emails or sending us a phone call, and just letting us know what was going on. And every board meeting, I think we had at least a half an hour discussion about COVID-19 and what her response was, and everybody had a chance to get their questions answered, which was very helpful.
My methods of communicating with the board and the families were multi-level. So at the beginning, there were a lot of communications that went out to families because things were changing so fast. And then we settled into a twice a week email communication for me, email and phone call. And the board was copied on every one of those communications that went to the families, so they got that. In addition, if there was a change in procedures, the board got an email directly from me about that change in procedures when it happened. And in my superintendent reports, the Otter Valley Board meets twice a month. RNESU and Barstow meet once a month. So in those superintendent reports, they got an update. In the board meetings, there was discussion, as Lori said. And then again, because we're policy governance, the boards asked me to review all of my executive limitations policies and give them a report of the impact of the school closure on those policies and where we stand. And that was, I think, an eye-opening report for all of us, the board and for me, to walk through each of those policies. That's where I could identify the financial liabilities that we have, and I could identify where we're differing from what in-school learning looks like. So the board also received that report.
We have one more question. Did you change your regular board meeting schedule during the initial phase when things were changing very quickly?
No, we did not, actually. We kept it the same. We knew that if we needed to get together quickly, we could, but we felt that since things were changing so quickly, Jean needed to focus her time and attention on getting things ready for our students and staff and families, and that the board would meet when we had to meet.
So I have another question. Have there been lessons learned so far in this process that you think may become your new practice, regardless of what the short and long-term future may look like?
Does learning Google Meets count as a lesson learned? For me, I think it's the importance of communication, communicating with my staff, communicating with the board and with the community, with parents and the community at large. In some ways, Lori was telling me this morning that there are some complaints that I communicate too much, and my feeling was too bad. For other people, it's not enough. So the importance, I think, is being transparent. The lesson learned is being transparent, telling people what we're thinking about in a way that is not overwhelming, I hope, and bring people along for the ride as opposed to not communicating. I think that was a major lesson that that we've done well on and that I would take into any future crisis.
Lori, do you have anything to add to that?
I think what we've learned from this is that you know, we have a great team that was able to put this together quickly. There's still kinks to be worked out. I think that our continuity of learning plan is going well, and that we will continue to make changes as we see how it's playing out. So right now, I think what we've learned, though, is I'll mirror what Jeannie said, which is that communication is key, and that that's the one, you know, if we're hearing that we're communicating too much and that's the complaint, then I'll take that over people saying that they're not hearing from us at all.
That totally makes sense. Is there anything else that either of you would like to add? Things that you feel really good about that in terms of how you've managed such a difficult situation?
You had asked a question in preparation for this about negotiations. We could speak to that briefly. We were in negotiations with both teachers and our support staff, both contracts in this June 30th. We were well into those negotiations and approaching the salary discussion at the time of school closure, and actually had to cancel meetings that week. So last week we held negotiations with both parties. The board held negotiations with both parties last week. And it was very difficult, but the board needed to revisit what they were putting on the table and significantly reduce it in anticipation of the financial crisis, which is right ahead of us. And that led to, at least in the Teachers Association, that led to a postponement of negotiations until next fall. The association felt that they wanted there needed to be time for a better handle on finances before settling on what the board was offering. So negotiations ended up being put on hold, and we'll start the year without a contract. And the boards will start up again in the fall with both, probably with both. There's still some question about the support staff, but you know, that's a direct impact of the financial uncertainties that we're in right now.
I have a couple more questions that'll come up. And I'll ask these questions of each of the panelists. So the other panelists should listen up. Prepare your answers. You had to change the world structure, the whole structure, over a weekend. People were more or less ready and capable. What were your biggest challenges?
I think for me, we had to turn education on its head in the matter of 48 to 72 hours without preparation. We had done a little bit the week before schools closed, where we had surveyed our parents to know what kind of internet access and computer access, et cetera, people had, but we had not done any training with our teachers on how to do digital learning or distance learning. So we had to turn everything upside down. I think for me, it was clicking into an incident command system immediately on Sunday the 15th, pulling in the administrative team for an unprecedented emergency meeting on a Sunday afternoon, talking with my association leaders that night, talking with the board members that night, and identifying all the different facets of flipping an education system on its head, such as technology, the custodial, the food service, the distance learning, the curriculum, identifying key people to be in charge of each of those and just running it really like an instant command system was the only way that it really could be done within that short a time span. And then also continual messages of support. We're all in this together. Teachers and paraeducators are learning how to do this at the same time kids and parents are learning how to do this. And we need to forgive our fumbles, and we need the opportunity for feedback so that we can make changes and just be really nimble to adjust quickly to what's happening.
Great. And one more. Oh, another question just came up. So two more questions. This
Okay,
one
I
is,
want to make sure that we leave enough time for our other district panelists as well.
okay. All right. So as a board chair, how do you support the line between supporting board members and their concerns while protecting the administration from an onslaught of inquiries?
So I'm really lucky, I think, to have 13 board members on the Otter Valley board, 12 other board members other than myself, who respected both Jean and myself enough to direct the questions to me. Any questions that they had, you know, I tried to keep them calm so that, you know, when they were being asked questions out on the street, that they had something to say, and that you know, showed that we were worried too. We knew that, you know, most of us all had kids in school, and how is this going to work? And but it's been really great. Our board has been very supportive of Jean, and the communication that she's given us has really kept everybody calm, and it's been great. So that's how I've dealt with as being board chair, keeping everybody calm and keeping Jean safe in her little bubble over there.
Fantastic. That's all the questions I have at this time.
Okay, so I want to thank you both for joining us, and I hope you'll stick around because there may be some more collective questions at the end of the program. But at this point, I would like to invite David Younts and Tammy Heffernan from the I'm going to get this right, the Mill River Unified Union School District. Tammy Heffernan is the board chair. Dave Younts is the superintendent, and I'd let's hear from you. What's going on down there?
Okay, well, hello, everybody. We are very pleased, Dave and I, to be able to participate in this. I believe the first question that you had wanted to ask, Susan, was how was the board supporting the superintendent? And our board is very, very, very proud of our administrative team and Dave. This has been a wonderful opportunity to let everyone see in our community how well organized our administrative team is. Dave and I spoke over the weekend that the schools were told to be closed by that Wednesday, and he advised me and the board that we were ready to close. Things were in place and there was no real need to wait. We decided that it would be most effective to do it immediately. And he set that in motion, and his team was just wonderful. I can't say enough about how well they responded to things that were changing minute by minute. I mean, Dave and I were talking several times on that Sunday, and I think that, it was just apparent that things were changing very quickly, like, Jean and Lori had just said. So we were very ready to proceed. We were getting daily emails and sometimes multiple times a day emails from Dave. As a board, we did not have board meetings until the beginning of April because of several factors. One is we trusted our administrative team and wanted them to do what they needed to do to get our kids and our teachers and our support staff where they needed to be to make distance learning happen in our district. And we didn't have any pressing other issues that really needed to be addressed by the board. And we also felt that we wanted to wait until we had a little bit better guidance, because it was not, from a health perspective, wise to have people in the building when they didn't need to be. So we wanted to wait until some of the open meeting law restrictions were evolved to allow no one to be there and us to entirely be virtual. And we've streamed our meetings because we're always recorded by PEG TV. So our meetings were always live streamed by our assistant superintendent, Brian Hill, who's done a wonderful job being our technology guru. Dave, anything else you want to add to that?
I think, Tammy touched on trust, and that's really the biggest piece. As a superintendent, that's how I feel supported, is when our administrative team and myself are trusted. And, I think that comes from a lot of work, to be frank with you. Tammy and I have a good, solid superintendent board chair relationship. That's an entirely different webinar, but there's a lot that goes into developing that trust. And I feel fortunate to work for a board that just puts their faith in us as school leaders to make sure that systems are organized and communication is solid, and that there's clarity, and our board asks questions when they need to, but they also realize when we need room to operate and just get work done, they do a nice job of letting us accomplish what we need to accomplish. So that really does come down to trust in my mind.
Dave, you hit on the communications question, which of course Jeannie and Lori were speaking so much about. What strategies have you been using to assure that there's effective communication between the board and the superintendent, and also wrap in the community with that?
Yeah, you bet. So I think I start with a personal philosophy that communication is everything. And when I make mistakes in my professional life, I can usually track those down to a missed opportunity or a failed execution on communicating something. I also realize that in absence of information, people will start to fill in the blanks on their own, and that puts everyone in a really difficult situation when we're all kind of making up our own realities. So we knew early on that consistent communication on expected timelines that was meeting the needs of all of our stakeholders was really important. So one of our early decisions was any email that I sent out to staff about where we were and what was going on, that same exact information went out to board members so that nobody would ever feel out of the loop. Any communication that went out to families or parents. And I think Jeannie mentioned this and Tammy did as well. You know, early on, I was communicating with families every day with status updates, and over time that has diminished. You know, now we're down to once or twice a week in terms of that type of communication from me. But that information also shared with the board. We've been using, like everyone else, using our social media opportunities, our local paper newsletter opportunities. We created a podcast to try to fill some needs and have some kind of longer lasting conversations about topics for folks who are interested. And we've just tried to be consistent and predictable with what we put out and when. It's also important to keep that information organized. And I found I need to not oversaturate people with information so that things get lost. So there is some strategy that goes into, okay, what do we share when? Can this wait till Wednesday? This needs to go out tomorrow. You know, how do you kind of stagger information so that it will be digested by everyone in the most logical form? And so far we've done okay, but we continue to look for ways to improve that. Right before this webinar, I was on a call with our person that coordinates communications for the district, and we were talking about some of the statewide groups that person is a part of, and just getting ideas from other districts with what they're doing and trying to figure out what applies to us and where we're missing the boat. So I'm pleased that is an ongoing conversation for us right now.
And I'd just like to jump in really quick on that issue, is that the board also put together a letter to its staff that Dave disseminated for us in conjunction with one of his emails, because we wanted them to know that the board was very appreciative of what they had been doing and the steps that they took, you know, under very tight and unexpected circumstances. When people left on Friday, nobody was really anticipating that we weren't coming back to school on Monday, you know, in that particular fashion. So, you know, we wanted the staff to know that we appreciated what they were doing. And similarly, we wanted a message to go out to the community from the board, letting them know that we appreciated their help and their cooperation, and that we were trying to do the best we could, and we appreciated everything that they were doing. Well, many of them were balancing monitoring their kids' schooling and their own professional careers. So we thought that was important.
Great. On the communications topic, I'm going to go try to pick some of the questions that were asked earlier. How frequently were board members updated from the administration?
We received every email that Dave sent, and the board would sometimes get multiple emails a day at the very beginning from Dave. It was all, for the most part, email communication to the whole board. Dave and I spoke frequently where necessary, but honestly, it was mostly by email, because that was just the most efficient means to communicate to all of us. We're 11 board members. And then those emails gradually got a little bit more spaced out as things got a little bit more calm, or at least, you know, seemingly so. Right, Dave?
Yeah, fell into a rhythm, I think, is probably the better way to put that. We're not calm quite yet.
Yeah.
Okay. And as a board chair, how do you walk the line between supporting board members and their concerns in this type of environment while protecting the administration from an onslaught of inquiries?
Well, I think that I'm very fortunate as the board chair, because our board has a lot of respect for Dave and his team. And I think that they are in just aware enough to not have barraged him with questions. We tried to not know that he had to do what he had to do in his team in order to get our kids and our teachers and our support staff doing what they were doing effectively. So really, it was more or less, I can't take any credit for it, because I think it was just each of our board members knows Dave and the team very well, and knew that if there was an important question, they could reach out, but not to flood him with just unnecessary inquiries, because we were getting such explicit information on a daily and sometimes a multi-time-a-day basis from him that there really weren't many questions, I don't think. Dave, did you field many questions from the individual?
Yeah, no, I would agree. Didn't field a lot of questions, and I think part of that comes from trying to give good communication on the front end so that there are less questions on the back end. But again, it goes back to the relationship piece and the trust piece. You know, our board members know, if you got a question, ask me. And if you ask me a question, you're going to get a pretty quick answer. because that's the way, just for me, that I operate, and folks have come to expect that from me. So I think when people know what to expect, when they know how you'll respond, when they know that if you don't have the answer, you'll commit to figuring it out and getting back to them, that just creates an environment where I don't feel that the board needs to protect me from itself or from the community or anything else. I find that it works for us to say, hey, let us know if you need something. We'll take care of it, or we'll respond as quickly as possible. And that type of dynamic is working well for us at this point in time.
I'm curious to know if you've been having any conversations about resumption of school in the fall and what that's going to look like.
Yeah, so we are, and really not to suggest that our eye is not on the current day, but at the administrative level and at the board level, we're really kind of shifting to the future. So the first piece that I have to mention is it'd be a disservice to not address the fact that we know there's a fiscal crisis waiting around the corner. And our board is beginning to engage in conversations with our administration about what that could look like in its worst case form. We all know that there are a million questions we don't have the answers to. We don't know how COVID is going to play out. We don't know how the legislature will intervene. We don't know how federal funds will or will not be allowed to be used for various things. So there's so much unknown, but I'm grateful to our board and to my administrative team, because folks are thinking about how do we plan for the worst and hope for the best. And, if anything in between those two happens, we'll be prepared for that. Separate from the financial piece, we are administratively, we've already started some design work looking ahead to what the fall, if we do in fact have school in person in the fall, what that could look like. We've really categorized that down into 4 primary areas. An obvious one is kind of our health services and supports for student area. Another has to do with operations at not just the board level, but the buildings and grounds level. Like, what do our systems look like and how do we shut those down again if we have to? And how do we get them up and running again quickly when those circumstances come? Third area we're looking at is related to our remote learning system. We are carefully analyzing how we make sure that we have remote learning ready to go on day 1 in the fall, anticipating that there will be future scenarios where we find ourselves in a virus surge, or we need to close down without much advance notice. We're planning for that. And then the final piece we're focusing on is the daily structures. What does transportation to school look like? What does schedules look like? What does student attendance look like? What does all the day-to-day things we view as normal now? What do those look like in an environment where we might still be required to social distance? We might be required to wear masks. We might need to trace contacts that students have had or staff have had with each other. So we're kind of preparing for the worst case scenario there and waiting to see what develops. What's enjoyable about that for those of us on the administrative side is that's good constructive work. There's a little bit of fun in, hey, big project. We don't know how it finishes, but we get to create something, we get to plan something, we get to figure out how to involve the board, how to involve members of our staff, and make good decisions for the future, even though we don't know what the future looks like. Would you add to that at all, Tammy?
I would just say that from the board perspective, we have been discussing with regard to the impending fiscal issues and then just restarting school in the fall, that we think it's really important to have a very open line of communication and a lot of transparency with our community. So we've made the decision that starting with, well, not that we haven't been doing it, but that to make a concerted effort with our next board meeting, which is happening on next Wednesday evening, to set aside some time to have those discussions best we can with the information we're at liberty to disclose to the community as to what we think those things look like. So people are prepared. I mean, in all honesty, we want people to understand that we don't know all the answers at this point in time, but we're trying really hard to share with them the information that we do know so that everyone is moving forward on the same page.
And related to that, we asked this of the other group too. What has the impact been with respect to any collective bargaining discussions that you're involved with?
Well, we've been very fortunate because we've had, Dave has been working with both our teachers and our support staff representatives in small groups. We've had very good success with some small group work between the 2 groups to work on language in our contracts and some of the other things. So we've had a great deal of success in getting a lot of the language in our contracts for both the teachers and the support staff worked out and agreed upon. The financial issues were next to be discussed, and both sides have agreed that there are more pressing issues right now with educating our kids and what the state of the health issues are and fiscal issues. So we've tabled those discussions for a bit of time based upon a mutual agreement right now to do so. Dave, is there anything else you want to add to that?
Nope, you got it all right there.
So there was a
I have
question
a
that
couple.
came in before related to that, which we didn't have time to ask the previous group, but does your contract hold employees on the current step when there's no contract, if should you start the fall with no contract, or
Yes.
are the new contracts issued with movement to the next step?
So we have a contract that holds folks at their current step. There is no step movement if there's not an agreement.
Okay, thanks.
And I do have a couple of new questions I'm going to try out on you. How are you handling the situation with students who are obviously having extreme problems with online schooling?
Dave?
It's a fantastic question. Honestly, that's the question of the day is comes down to equity of access, ability of students to work independently, parents to support that whole process. And I think the COVID situation has highlighted inequities that were already in effect for us. Well, the way we've approached it internally is we've tried to focus more than anything on relationships. The outcomes we're seeking are connections with kids and connections with families and helping our families to feel supported through this process, realizing that there may be some students that don't make as much academic progress as we'd like during this time. We want to invest in making sure that we stay connected to those students and have them ready for returning to whatever school looks like in the fall. I guess I'm going to connect to a question you asked earlier as well, which was about what have we learned about kind of that instructional process and how quickly we moved. And I think there's a dynamic that was really impressive in mid to late March when we watched all of the work happening as teachers were hustling to figure this out and putting systems into place and moving quickly and having incredible impacts. And there was adrenaline involved in that. When you're in the midst of that initial crisis, there's a lot of adrenaline. The challenge, I think, for systems across the state is sustaining that. We've seen some predictable patterns of high activity, high excitement, sometimes followed by a crash. And that doesn't just happen for kids who are working at home, but it happens for educators who are trying to take care of their families and educate other children in the midst of things. So supporting our students as they might struggle socially and emotionally is a priority for us. Supporting our staff as they start to experience the struggles of missing their kids, missing their routine, missing those interactions that are, let's be honest, a part of becoming a teacher. The reason people become teachers is they like engaging with people in person in a setting where you can measure by your eyes what's going on, and you can get a sense on when students are understanding and when they're not. Being forced to relearn all that or learn that in a new context is taxing. And we know we're going to have some support that we're going to have to put into place for the foreseeable future to make sure that we recover well from this. But I do believe in educators in Vermont. We've got good people working hard to do the right things for the right reasons. And I've always believed if that's your approach, you eventually end up with good outcomes.
Okay, how do you communicate challenges or specific difficulties to the board between meetings?
I would say that usually starts with a conversation between Tammy and I. You know, part of our relationship is, I think the text message is one of our best friends. Hey, Tammy, do you have 5 minutes to chat? You know, and so we have a lot of those quick conversations where she'll just help me to strategize about the best way to maybe enter into a situation or communicate about a situation. And usually we work together. You know, one of our shared responsibilities is to develop agendas for board meetings. So we'll work together to decide on what that might look like, or if there are other ways or timing of communication that need to occur. And I found that usually works relatively well for us and allows us to be nimble and act quickly when we need to. Tammy, would you add to that at all?
I would agree with that. And I think that, again, I have to give kudos to our board members because anytime we've needed to gather the troops, so to speak, for an emergency meeting or a special meeting. We need to get everybody in the same place, be it virtually now or physically. Everyone has responded amazingly, put aside things and really just come together. So we're very fortunate in that regard.
And if I could, one more question.
And then we'll move on.
Yes, and then we'll move on. Do you think there may be a surge in homeschooling next year, especially among those that did well, that are doing well currently with homeschooling?
Dave?
Listen, I think it's possible. And if you ask me how I feel about it, I would say, I don't know if this is blasphemy or not, but I'm okay with it. I think when you're an educator, we want to make sure that all students are educated well. We want to make sure they're getting what they need. To me, the definition of equity in education is really simple. Is everybody getting what they need when they need it? And I think this experience is identifying for us that different people respond in different ways to different types of input and different types of learning. And so for me, if a family realizes, hey, this was a productive experience for us, or we have the ability to make this work, I think we should celebrate that and not be worried about it. The concern for me in that does come down to equity of resources and equity of access, right? We can draw some lines and say that some families from the jump might have better ability to pull that off than others. And that's a really interesting policy type of conversation about what does that mean for us as a society? Do we run the risk of haves having more and have-nots having less through the course of people being able to make even more decisions about how they access learning? But ultimately, if we believe that we want every kid in Vermont to get what they need when they need it, I think we need to come to terms with the fact that different things work for different people, and thinking about how our system delivers that for everyone is a somewhat exciting lens on the future in my mind.
I would agree with that.
Well, I want to thank you both very much for sharing your insights and your thoughts with us today. And I invite you to stick around, but I think it's time that we'd like to hear from the group from Montpelier Roxbury School District. So if Libby and Jim would join us, and if you guys want to close yourselves out, that would be great. So welcome to Jim Murphy, Board Chair at Montpelier Roxbury, and Libby, whose name says Susan Holson up there because we had a little technical difficulty, so she's logged in as if she were me, but that's Libby Bonesteel, the superintendent. I don't know which of you would like to start, but
yeah, I can start.
To the other two, the two groups, just ditto everything.
Yeah, no, a lot of ditto. I'm going to start first by thanking you for inviting us to this discussion. Both Libby and I are very happy to participate. I want to say, that Libby and her team did a fantastic job before the school closing of really putting together a contingency plan, which made it much easier for the board. So we actually did have an emergency meeting before the closure when there was talk that closure might be imminent. And I think there was a lot of negotiations kind of going on between the Agency of Education and the administration about what to do with a really fast-moving situation. So we had an emergency board meeting. Libby laid out a bunch of contingencies, how they were planning, how the administration was going to plan to act if various things happened. Our priority was really, obviously, one, to support the administration, make sure they had everything they need. And that meant putting in place, we took a couple actions. We gave Libby express permission to make sure that, employees, hourly employees who, may not be part of distance learning would continue to get paid during the shutdown. And then we also just got briefed on what the priorities were, making sure that the students were taken care of, making sure that we moved to online learning quickly, making sure that we took care of all our employees, and then importantly, making sure that we took care of students who had needs. We were able to get people who needed lunch and other food programs, those services. So that was the board priority. We had a lot of communication between Libby and I during those days when the shutdown occurred. We were in touch multiple times, either by phone or email or text. As that fast-moving situation occurred, Libby did a fantastic job of getting out information both to the community and to the board. Again, multiple updates as things moved. That's kind of been our mode since then, is to make sure that the administration has the support they need. I think we've gotten into a bit more of a rhythm now. The board's position right now is to make sure we have current support for what we need, and then we are starting to turn a lens towards how we pull out of this, both fiscally and from an educational perspective.
Yeah, I think just to add to things that Jim said, we've talked a lot about communication today, and I think that's where I've learned the most is when we're successful. And so I had my eyes on multiple pieces that I don't normally put my eyes on a regular basis, like parents groups and social media, and just tracking what people are saying and how they're responding to everything, and to make sure that I was communicating fast and furious. So when a decision was made, like closure of school for the entire year, I didn't have a well-written communication ready to go, but I knew I had to get something out to say, hey, we're on this and we're thinking about it and we'll be in touch very shortly about this. And just those simple emails to the entire community, I think, were very helpful, so people knew that we were on top of things and that we were going to be there to support them. And as far as the board has been nothing but supportive through this whole thing. My board members I trust explicitly, so there are many times that I'd call a certain board member and say, hey, let me just pass this by you. Let me get your thoughts on this. What do you think? Because they're well represented in the community. They know this community really well. And so I use them a lot as sounding boards throughout this whole process. And that was incredibly helpful. And just knowing that I can do that is a big relief for me as a leader and a superintendent of a district. So I think we've worked incredibly collaboratively through this whole process, and there's really no other option for it. You have to do that. It's too hard to do it by yourself, or just as a district leadership team, or just as a board. We have to go in this together and support each other. And I think we've done a pretty good job with that.
You've both mentioned the fiscal realities that are coming at us. So I know at the state level, there's a linkage between that and collective bargaining negotiations. And so I'm going to ask you the same question that we've asked the others with respect to that. And also we can tie into that what conversations you may be having about what school's going to look like in the fall.
Yeah, so we have 3 contracts and 3 unions that we work with actually at MRPS. We have AFSCME, the support staff, and teachers, and all 3 were in contract negotiations this year. The teachers and AFSCME, which is custodial and administrative staff, they were further behind. There was a lot of, we hadn't had as many conversations with those 2 groups prior to closure as we had with the teachers. So the teachers, we've gotten to a place where we've agreed on language, and we're in a very similar spot to the other 2 districts in terms we're at the salary piece. And we do have one more meeting set for salary, and I'm not really sure where that's going to go. And with our support staff, I think both of those unions have kind of said, can we just get something signed, not really worry about language too much, just get something signed for next year and then go back at it next year. I believe that's where we are now with those 2 negotiations. So it's really put a hold. It's hard to do that kind of work remotely and virtually. It's just harder to do that. I think being in person is it's a big adjustment to not be able to see body language and talk to people and say, hey, what do you really mean by that? To do the negotiations. That's been challenging for us. As far as going back in the fall, we're in the wait and see mode like everybody else. We've just started having conversations of what it could look like without having the guidance from the state level yet. It's a lot of hypothetical discussions, which are hard to have, but we're starting them. I've just been in 2 days of meetings with superintendents across the nation in a conference I've been in, and every one of us is talking about very similar things right now, whether you're talking to a soup in Illinois or Florida or South Carolina. This is a common conversation. And should social distancing be in place for kids? That's really almost an impossible task. When you have more than one child in a room, they typically come together. So we're going to have to really think about that and think about what classrooms look like. Think about what we know about good practice and collaboration look like with kids. Think about what cafeterias look like and walking through the halls and passing through the halls. These are all very difficult challenges that we're going to be facing should we still need to have those social distancing measures in place, which I don't think any one of us thinks we don't. So I know that one of the good things that's come out of this whole process is that my fellow superintendents of the state, including Jeannie and Dave, who are on this, we have very much come together as a network and a team. And so we're all going to be talking about how we're doing this together, I think.
Yeah,
I have a couple of, sorry. Go ahead.
I was just saying, I think Libby covered most of it. But as a board, we're very concerned about the challenges, both fiscally and then practically, of how do we come back safely next year. And there's educational worries too. I think people have done a great job with remote learning, but it's not ideal. And the more we do it, the more you have to worry about kids getting behind. And I think some of the biggest concerns the board has is some of the inequities with distance learning. I think with families that have the ability to be very supportive of their kids and engage them, they're probably doing okay. But I think some of the kids that are in those situations are going to be falling behind, and the more that we're not able to have in school learning, the more those inequities are going to show.
Great. And along those same lines, I have a great question that goes right along with that. Since there's likelihood that we will need to return to online learning at some point before this crisis is fully over, do any of you have a system for figuring out which teachers at all levels are struggling and which are successful with the online platform?
We don't have a system yet. I wouldn't call it a system. We definitely can look at, so one of the things we did in terms of communication was that we put a common website together so that all of our distant learning and remote learning plans are in one place for a family. So it's an easy look for me and my director of curriculum and instruction to say, and my principals to say what's happening in each of our classrooms. And we definitely have teachers who are knocking this out of the park and have provided an environment for students that are almost just as good as in-person instruction. And we have some who are really struggling with this and trying to do exactly what they were doing, but remotely. And it's different. So you have to change pace. So right now, honestly, we're still in a let's get things in place mode. And we will have to move into how do we do this better? And how do we ensure student success in what they need to be successful in regards to learning and social emotional and academics through different means, right? We're still in survival mode to a point. And I believe for the next couple of weeks, we'll probably be there. But as it becomes more of a reality that we're going to have to change school as we know it for the foreseeable future, we have to get better at this and figure out how to do this well so that kids are continuing to learn. We're not there systematically yet, though.
Yeah, and I think another thing that we might have to struggle with too is as we start to come together, because it's not going to be quickly back to normal. Is how do we integrate employees and students who are closer to vulnerable communities, because the need for protections and distancing around some of them might be greater than for some other families, and that may create challenges and inequities as well that we're going to have to grapple with.
Okay, one more question, new question. Were your board priorities set prior to the shutdown or determined at your emergency meeting?
Board priorities? Yeah, I mean, I think that the priorities in here have kind of, we've been looking to the administration to, I think, guide what the priorities are, particularly in terms of, how to implement moving to distance learning. So, I mean, I think our chief priority, and this may sound like a cop-out answer, has been give the administration the room and the resources it needs to be successful. And so we've really kind of been taking, I think, direction from Libby and her team, and they've been doing a great job of keeping us informed and letting us know what the options are and letting us know what their thinking is. Yeah, but I think our main priorities have been aligned with the administration, which is to do this as successfully as possible, to support our teachers and our administration, to make sure that we're addressing the needs of our students, and that to make sure that we're addressing particularly those who are more vulnerable in our population in terms of needing special services, needing meals, etc. So our priorities right now have really kind of been doing this as equitably, as successfully as we can under very tough circumstances and circumstances that are constantly changing.
Yeah, I think that going forward, that fiscal piece, I will be looking to the board to have some very hard conversations with myself and my leadership team of what are the buckets that we're really going to look at in terms of financial matters, or what buckets do they really want us to look at in terms of financial matters in order to make our next reality financially doable, and to ensure that all of our kids are supported in the way that they need to be supported. So I think the board is going to have a major role going forward in helping us determine just where those buckets are going to be, and what do we want to hold to, and what do we want to start to limit.
Yeah, no, and those are going to be, immensely, I think difficult conversations. Both difficult because there's going to be difficult choices, but I also think we're just not going to know a lot. Yeah, I mean, we could be in a situation, if you look at some of the numbers, that are very dire. And I think we're a school district that's probably in one of the better situations statewide. And, we could also, depending on particularly what the feds do, it could be something that's, that's bad, but not awful. So, planning for those and trying to get as ahead of the situation as we can, without either panicking or making decisions in the dark, is going to be a very difficult dance.
Okay, I think we have reached the end of our time. So I want to start by just thanking all of you who have joined us today, all of the panelists. You've been wonderful, and we really appreciate the time that you took to share your thoughts with everybody who was online today. And also, I want to thank all of you who have been participating for joining us today, but especially for the commitment that you have made to Vermont's children and families and communities. We all know how important schools are in our communities, and this has been such a challenging time for everybody. You are heroes, so thank you.